The purpose of this video is to take you through a very base, both provisioning and configuration process to get Veeam active and backing up your virtual workloads within the SoftLayer cloud. So to get started, the first place we'll go, as you might imagine, is to the controlsoftlayer.com, the customer portal. And what we'll do is we will order a server to host the Veeam services. So go into devices, device list, and then select order devices. So we'll follow up this video with some others to talk about how we can account for larger environments, scale out environments. But for our purposes today, we're going to take you through the base install. So the base install is with a VSI, a virtual server instance, and a public node. So we're going to go ahead and order that. We're going to say click on monthly, and we'll wait for our options to come up. So the first thing that you'll want to do is select a data center. Now, obviously, it behooves you to select a data center that's in some proximity to your virtual environment. In my case, I'm here in Dallas, so I'm going to go ahead and choose Dallas 10. Now, the minimum server specs for your Veeam VSI server are 4 CPUs, 4 virtual CPUs, and 8 gig of RAM. So I'm going to choose 4x8. Okay. And then I will choose my operating system. If you're not familiar, Veeam is Windows based, so go ahead and choose Microsoft. And then we definitely recommend that you go with Server 2016. 2016 and the REFS file system, which we'll see in a few minutes, definitely give us some big performance benefits, particularly around Veeam operations such as the synthetic full backup. So we'll choose our OS, we'll choose our base disk, and no need to choose any other disks, as we will use Endurance storage for our backup repository. We definitely want you to select off of the default network speed. For the public VSI instance, our max is 1 gig, so definitely choose 1 gig. 10 or 100 will definitely make your Veeam backups dismally slow. So the only other thing we need to choose is our Veeam, the number of Veeam licenses that we're going to want to deploy within our virtual environment. Now, understand that the environment that the video is captured in is a pre-prod, a pre-general availability instance of the catalog. So the verbiage and the license packs may change slightly in the production version. Just be aware of that, but it will be substantially the same. So once you've chosen your server, your operating system, your networking, and Veeam, we'll go ahead and place our order. Once your order is verified, you'll be presented with the checkout window, and there are 2 things you need to finish up, to wrap up on this screen. One, you need to give your server a host name, so we will just call it Veeam and give it a domain, my lab. Go ahead and choose the terms and conditions boxes, and then you go ahead and submit your order, and then the provisioning process will proceed. What I've done is I've already allocated a couple VSI servers for the purposes of our demo today, so we don't have to wait for the provisioning to wrap up. So once your VSI has been provisioned, what you can do is go grab the public IP for that VSI. And so I'm going to open my terminal server client, and nope, I think I already have that in there. And I'm also going to go ahead and grab the password, the admin password here. So got the password, got the IP. I'm going to paste my password in there and get connected up to my VSI image. Now, obviously, the first thing that you want to make sure is Veeam deployed properly. It's a pretty good indication if you see the Veeam backup and replication icon on the upper left-hand quadrant of your desktop. If you want to go verify, Veeam services are running, that's of course fine as well. But you shouldn't have any issues with Veeam getting deployed into the image. So before we go in and configure anything within Veeam, what I'd like to do is go ahead and get the VSI instance ready to connect to the block storage that we'll allocate for the Veeam repository. So a couple things we want to do there. Obviously a couple different ways you can do this, but the first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to enable multipath IO for the server, which is not enabled by default. So I'm going to go into my local server and add roles and features. Next, next, next. And add multipath IO. So I'm going to tell it add multipath IO, restart if necessary, and get the installation going. And you can see the server has rebooted on its own, so we'll try to reconnect to it here. Okay, once that feature is enabled, we'll run back into Server Manager, and we will turn on our iSCSI initiator. Oh, let the feature installation finish there. Okay. So now we go back to Tools and iSCSI Initiator, or you could obviously access the applet directly if you like as well. So what I'm going to do here is, now that I'm ready to connect to my storage, I'm going to go ahead and open up a connection to my IMS portal here from my VSI instance as well, so I don't have to flip back and forth to get the connections parameters for my storage. So let's do this. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to change the initiator name. So again, to save time, I've already allocated endurance block storage for the Veeam repository. So if I go into my block storage, you can see I have two different storage types that are differentiated by the IOPS per gig. So our very, very, very preliminary recommendation is for backup archives that are more copy archive capability. We're just looking to store backup data. The 0.25 IOPS per gig endurance storage appears to provide plenty of performance for that level of repository. If you believe that you'll be using advanced features of Veeam, such as instant VM recovery or sure backup, then we definitely recommend that you use at least 2 IOPS per gig endurance storage to support those sorts of workloads. So for our purposes today, we'll go ahead and we'll use the 2 IOPS per gig. And the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to authorize our VSI host. So go ahead and select that from the storage dropdown. And in our case, this is a virtual server. And we want to attach that to this, this VSI instance. So we'll submit that. Okay. We'll go ahead and open up the properties for that storage. And the first thing we'll need to do is, in our configuration, we'll need to change the initiator name to the one that's been allocated for us for this host. So that would be this guy. So if I go down into my storage, I may have to change my geometry here a bit. Okay. So I'm going to copy that. Okay. Okay, so the next thing that I will do is I'm going to click on the Discovery tab, and again, all of this information is also posted within the SoftLayer knowledge base as well. But I'm going to go ahead and open my Discover portal, and I'm going to want to point it to the target address that we get from our allocated storage. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to hit advanced, and I'm going to set up authentication. So you need to enable chat and grab the user ID or the username that was allocated when you allocated the storage. So I'm going to place that in there. Oh, maybe. And then I'm going to grab the password. Paste that in there, say OK, OK. And if it's successful, it should show up there. If there are any typos or errors or otherwise, it should throw an error and not allow you to add that in there. So the next thing that I'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and click on the targets tab. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to connect to this guy that I just added, enable multipath, and then you go through the same process where I copy the username and password into the chat connection criteria here. Okay. Okay. And if everything works successfully, you should see that the storage is now connected to my virtual server. So now what I can do is I can go ahead and activate that storage. So if I go into computer and disk management, so I'll go to computer management, disk management, you should see that new 2 terabyte disk, and I'm going to bring it online and then initialize it. Well, it's already initialized, so I'm going to create a new symbol volume. So I'm going to say next, use the full amount allocation there. I'm going to give it a more descriptive drive letter. We call it V for Veeam. And then I'm going to change it to, we definitely recommend, as I mentioned before, that you use REFS. Our current recommendation is you do a 64K block size. And then I'm just going to call it, repository. So I'm going to finish that. And you should see Veeam. There we go. All healthy and ready to receive backups. So once I've completed these steps, I should be ready to begin my Veeam setup. So I'm going to go into and open the Veeam console, and it should pass through your local credentials just fine. You shouldn't need to enter any new ones. And while that's working, I'm going to go back to my device list here, because what I'm going to need to do, in addition to allocating the configuration for my repository, I'm also going to need to connect my ESXi host. So let's flip back to Veeam, and it's still cranking up. So I'm going to go ahead and okay. So now that the Veeam console is open, I'm going to go to the backup infrastructure node over in the lower left quadrant of my screen, and let's go ahead and do the backup repository first. So go to backup repositories and say add. And in this case, I'm going to say, this is endurance to IOP. That's what we'll call our repository. It is connected directly to this particular server, so Windows Server. And then what we can do is we can populate the all the disks from the server. It'll go through and enumerate all those. And we want to give it our V drive that we added. Within the Advanced tab here, we also, generally best practices to use per VM backup files. So we'll enable the per VM backup files. Everything else should be fine. Should be fine. And then we'll apply, and Veeam will go ahead and create that infrastructure item. So we'll say finish. Okay, so here's an important note. So the what Veeam is doing here is it's notifying you. Saying, hey, you created a new repository. Would you like to land the Veeam configuration backup on that repository? And in this case, we really want to say no here. The reason is we want to make it flexible for you to add capacity to your repository, as you move forward. So what we don't want is for you to enable Veeam and then have to allocate all the storage you're ever going to need to support your backups. So what we're going to do is we're going to consider this repository this we've just created our initial repository extent. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to create a scale out backup repository, and I think this will make a little more sense as we go through. So what I'm going to call this is just Veeam repo, and say next, and then I'm going to add an extent. So in our case, we're going to add the block storage that we just created, the endurance storage. We're going to add that to our scale out backup repository and finish that out. So the reason this is important, particularly in a SoftLayer environment, is again, we don't want you to have to purchase all of the storage you're ever going to need up front, because storage isn't necessarily cheap. So what we can do is, as you need additional storage, you can allocate additional endurance storage. You can create an individual repository here and simply add it to the Veeam repo. In this way, you don't have to go back and change your backup jobs and try to remember which jobs are pointed to which repositories. We can scale the backups out seamlessly with new extents within the Veeam scale out backup repository. So we're completely set now. We're ready to land our backups within our repository. So that's all good. So now we simply need something to back up. So I'm going to go to the Manage Servers tabs of our backup infrastructure, and I'm going to say Add a Server. And so we're going to use just a simple ESXi host for our example today. If you have vCenter deployed within your SoftLayer environment, we definitely recommend you add vCenter rather than your individual ESXi hosts here. Or if you're using Hyper-V, Hyper-V works more or less the same way in terms of the configuration that we're doing here. But we're going to go ahead and add our vSphere server, or in this case, our ESXi host. So I'm going to go back into my devices. And this is my IP for my bare metal ESXi host. So I'm going to paste that in there. Obviously, if you have some sort of DNS configured, you could use a DNS name as well. And now, obviously, I have to have credentials to log into the host. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to grab my credentials, the username that SoftLayer has assigned. Let's see. Copy that. Okay, and then I'm going to grab the password, paste that, and just call this my ESXi. Okay, select OK. Hit next. If the authentication is successful, you may get the server or the server certificate warning. That's fine. We know we want to connect to the server. We'll go ahead and connect. And then once we've connected, it'll save the server into our configuration, and we'll be done. Okay, now that process is wrapped up, you'll see the ESXi host appears in our Managed Servers node now. So now that we have the storage configured, we have the server, the ESXi host connected, we're ready to start backing up at this point. So if we click on the Backup and Replication node, you'll go to Jobs or simply choose Backup Job from the tool ribbon, and we'll call this our Veeam job, and we'll add VMs. So we can add VMs in a number of ways. If you've got vCenter enabled, we can point directly to a cluster, we can point directly to a folder or a resource pool or individual hosts or individual VMs. So in our case, we'll just go ahead and we just want to back up everything on the host. So we can say add. That way, it's always a good idea to use some sort of logical container. That way, is if VMs deprecate out and migrate in, you don't have to go change your jobs to include those. So we're just going to back up everything on that host. We've got 2 Windows VMs and a Linux VM. And then we definitely want to land the backup on our repository, so our Veeam repository. Here you could specify how many restore points you want to keep on disk, how many days or points you want to have. Do next. We can tell it when to run the job. If I want to run it at midnight every day, I can do it there. There's also some advanced settings I can apply there. And then once I'm done, I can simply go ahead and start the job. See, the job starts. And if you want to drill into the details on what it's doing, you can double click on the job and click open up the details, and you can see the job starting. It enumerates the VMs, all the VMs on the host. And then once it takes a VM snapshot and begins processing the data, you'll see the throughput indicators begin to work and all that. Obviously, your initial full backup will take considerably longer than your subsequent incremental backups. Veeam does fully leverage the change block tracking features that VMware makes available to us. So literally every subsequent backup, we're only backing up the blocks that have changed. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I hope your Veeam deployment is successful. Thanks a lot.